fellow travelers, students, Northeasterners, Huskies, one and all, we are delighted you're here. Thank you for coming out and welcome. Let me see a show of hands. For how many of you is this your first time in the sacred space? Wow, that is terrific. Is this space not beautiful? Is it not incredible? Yeah? Is it so beautiful that you forgive us for starting 10 minutes late? I know some people think that's Northeastern Standard Time, but I'm sorry, we have just had a jam-packed Wellness Wednesday and some super activities going on all day. We're delighted that you're here to join us for a Spiritual Advisors panel discussion on interfaith perspectives on faith and science, wellness and healing. How many of you have read the book Transcendent Kingdom by Yagayasi? How many of you were supposed to have read it over the summer but didn't do it? You don't have to raise your hand. Okay. Thank you for your honesty. We encourage honesty here. So in any event, we are delighted to have this conversation with you. There's no expectation that you will have read the book because we're really opening up a conversation about deeper themes that the book touches on, but that life touches on. And we know that you'll have a lot to say and share and think as audience members, and we have a wonderful panel here. And my name is Alex Levin-Kern. I'm Executive Director of the Center for Spirituality, Dialogue, and Service. And I want to introduce you to my colleague, one of our mindfulness fellows, Mellows, named Sophie. She can tell you what that's about, and she'll be co-moderating the panel. She's one of our fearless student leaders here.
Thank you, Alex. Can everyone hear me all right? Great. So Mindfulness Fellow, or Mellow, is one of the many roles I have here at CSDS, and essentially I lead guided meditations that we offer here from noon to noon 30, Monday through Friday. And it's CSDS custom to start every event with a mindful moment. So if you can just sit nice and tall, roll your shoulders back, and whenever you're ready, gently bring your eyes to a close. Taking in a nice deep breath, filling your lungs. Letting go of anything that may have happened today or things you know will happen. And just focusing on the inhale and the exhale. Noticing that with each breath, we gain more life, allowing it to nourish our bodies and minds. Noticing a simple act that transcends across all beings. Allow your breath to fill you with ease, and your exhale to let go of the tension. Taking in some last breaths. And whenever you're ready, gently open your eyes. Thank you guys. I'm going to be passing it back down.
Thank you, Sophie. So we have a wonderful panel of spiritual advisors, which is Northeastern's term for chaplains. We have a staff here of over 50 people from all the world's, virtually all of the world's spiritual, religious, and humanist traditions. And we have a fine representative sample, not each faith, but at least 1, 2, 3, 4, and if you include Sophie and me, 5, 6 different traditions in Northeastern's global spiritual universe. And they will be responding to some impossibly difficult questions that I posed to them. And we expect that you will come up with perhaps even more challenging mysteries to engage around these questions of faith and science, religion and science, and reason in dialogue or in conflict or in collaboration with one another, or some of these themes as to how science and faith or spirituality or mindfulness can contribute to healing and wellness, as they did in various ways in the story of Gifty and Transcendent Kingdom and her family, and as many of us experience in one way or another in our own families or in our own communities, whether here on campus or around the country or around the world. So I would ask that each of my colleagues, for the benefit of those on Zoom, take the microphone and introduce themselves. How about actually we have Asher introduce himself first, because I know he's able only to be with us for about half an hour. So Asher, if you could share your name, pronouns if you wish, and the spiritual or religious community that you serve here on campus.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Asher Planch. I go with the he series pronouns. I am the spiritual affiliate for Youth Empowerment Ministry, which is a non-denominational Christian fellowship at Northeastern University. YEM is also a nonprofit organization, and so we have a few other clubs at various campuses like Suffolk, UMass Dartmouth, UMass Lowell, and there's one more. Oh no, Northeastern, Suffolk University, Dartmouth. Yeah, so thanks for having me, everyone.
Thank you. And Jesse.
Thank you so much. My name is Jesse, and I am the rabbinic intern at Northeastern Hillel and currently a second year rabbinical student at the Hebrew and College Jewish Institute for Religion in New York City. I'm very excited to be here with you today. I use he, him pronouns as well. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
I'm Megan Holding. I use she, her, hers, and I am the Episcopal Spiritual Advisor here. I work with a group called Open Table, which is a Lutheran Episcopal ministry. So we are a mainline Protestant Christian denomination.
Hello, my name is Fayez Khwaja. I am one of the close spiritual advisors for the Muslim students. I use the he, him, his pronouns. I'm just basically serving the Muslim students on campus.
Terrific. And can everyone hear us in the back of the room? Because this microphone only amplifies to the people on Zoom. It doesn't amplify to you. So you can hear us as we speak at this level. Okay. Over the outrageous fun that people are having in Blackman Auditorium below. Excellent. And again, I'm Alex Kern, he, him, his, and I come from a Quaker tradition, but serve the interfaith community here. Quaker tradition grounded in progressive Christianity and the Protestant tradition. And Sophie, you want to say a word about your own spiritual identity?
Sure. Hi everyone, I'm Sophie. I'm a third year political science student here at Northeastern. I'm on the e-board for Northeastern University's Buddhist group and identify largely with Buddhist traditions.
Excellent. So, Sophie, would you like to pose our first question to the distinguished panel, and they can respond, and then we'll take it from there. Oh, and I'll pass around little sticky things if you have questions that you would prefer to write on pieces of paper to pass up, or you can just raise your hand when the time comes for open Q&A.
Awesome, thank you, Alex. And I just want to preface in asking these questions, I don't necessarily mean, speaking for the entirety of a tradition or a background or culture, but more so just in your own experience, sharing your own stories, and the intersections of religion and science in that. So the first question posed to the panel is, how were you raised to understand science and religion and their role in healing and wellness? And just whoever feels free can speak first, or I can pass the mic to those in person.
Or we can call on folks, because it looks like everyone's like putting the finger here and saying not it.
I can start.
Okay, I call on Fayez. Go ahead, Bill.
So the question, how were you raised with religion and science, religion and science? So sadly, it wasn't a part of my life. I was actually raised mostly secular, or well, with a cultural sort of background, and religion came to me sort of at the end of high school, and I mean, so I was born into a Muslim family, but we weren't very, my parents were not overly or overtly religious. Once I sort of, I say actually once I converted to Islam, even though I was born Muslim, then the religion became a big deal. As far as science is concerned, I've been a science junkie since I was born. So I love science, and anyone who hears me speaking, especially some of the Muslim students, they know that it's all science. So I'm throwing, if you don't like science, then you're probably not going to like me hearing your stuff. So I love science. It just teaches me so much about the world, and what it's done for me now is the marriage that sort of I've made in my mind between science and religion. And to me, Islam lends itself very, very well to science. There seems to be a very deep integration. I know I'm going to the last question here, but there seems to be a very deep integration between science and Islam, and a lot of what is, what I'm finding in science strengthens my faith and strengthens my belief in God. And to give you an anecdote, there were two scholars who were speaking, two Islamic scholars who were speaking, and they asked, one of them asked the other, what are you reading lately? And he said, I'm reading a book about God. He says, oh, what book are you reading? I may have read it. He said, I'm reading a book on biology. Because, again, the idea is that science will teach him about who God is and how God is and what he has created.
So I will go next. So I grew up, I guess kind of the opposite. I grew up in a quite religious family. I grew up in a Roman Catholic family. We went to church every Sunday. I went to Catholic schools all the way through except for college. And I grew up in a family that was very academically minded, but not science. A lot of historians, a lot of teachers and lawyers, but not a lot of scientists. But in my mind, religion and science are two viewpoints, two sets of tools, two orientations, whatever you want to call them, that are very compatible, that teach us a lot about the world, about how we live and are in the world, about communities, how we live and are in communities, and about who God is, who the divine is, and how God, the divine, lives and moves in the world with different sets of questions. So in terms of growing up, I would say I was never taught that there was a divide. I was taught that there are a lot of different ways to explore the big questions of the world, whether they are, the scientific questions of how things work, or the more theological, religious, spiritual questions of what is the meaning of how those things work and how we use them in the world. So again, to jump ahead to the third question, 2 sets of ways to understand the world and find meaning in the world. Asher, raise his hand.
Thank you. Asher, you're next.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting question. I started having like flashbacks of childhood, but I remember growing up, my parents would wake me up to go to church, and I would use the sermon as nap time. And so as a little kid, my pillow became my mother's lap, until one day there was an evangelist who came by, and he preached something, and I don't remember what he preached, but I remember that day like just being super convicted and feeling a pull on my heart. And for whatever reason that day I was not sleeping, right? And so I went down, and that's when I gave like my life to Christ. And from there it was kind of like a journey of discovering who this man Jesus is, what happened to me that day, why was I so provoked and compelled, to kind of surrender myself and surrender my life. And my parents never forced me to do anything, right? But they always kind of led me by example. So I've seen my parents, read their Bibles, and my dad going to church and asking us to go to church with him. And, when you're young enough, they can kind of make you go to church, right? So that was also happening. But then as I got older, I also, naturally, I guess, began to think of those bigger questions, right? And what I've realized is that science and God are not mutually exclusive, right? And so in growing up, I think it's almost been it's been like a path of discovery on how did God influence science, right? I think in my journey of faith and walk right now, it's figuring out what God has already put in place and trying to understand why those things are, how those things are, and basically seeing God in all of those things. So I've never had the two be mutually exclusive in my life, but trying to find what the linkage is, or develop a relationship with God even through science. So.
Jesse, thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you. So I could probably say ditto to my colleague who spoke first, to Baz, in that I grew up with a very secular family style. We, sort of kept kosher, but not really kosher style. I went to Hebrew school, but didn't really go to services. Didn't go to synagogue unless I knew someone whose bar mitzvah was, or it was like the high holy days once a year. But prayer wasn't a part of my daily life, and religion wasn't there so explicitly, but it was there implicitly in my family's values, in our culture. And when it comes to medicine and healing, that was explicit. That was there. My mom works at a medical school. My dad sits on the board of a healthcare organization. He was close friends with Jonas Salk, who invented the polio vaccine. I'm named after him. So medicine and science have always been at the forefront of my life. I thought I was going to be a scientist for most of my life. That's what I wanted to do. In high school, I interned in a biomedical research laboratory. Before I decided to become a rabbi, I was an EMT, and I was working on New York City ambulances as an EMT, taking care of people as a first responder, and really immersing myself in the world of medicine and healing. And I came to this rabbinical idea in a number of ways, but one of them was through my medical work, was through healing. That was a huge part of it, being with people who were in their worst moments, who were sick, who were so close to death, grappling with that, thinking about it, talking it through with my patients, helps me think a lot about death and life and what my role is when it comes to relating to those who are struggling or suffering or even celebrating. And guiding people through that, chatting with people as they struggle with various questions relating to life and death and sickness and health. And I see the two as very much connected. You know, science gets us so far and answers so many questions for us, but it doesn't always tackle the existential component of what we're dealing with, what we're looking at. You know, it often tells us the what, sometimes it tells us the why and the how, but it doesn't always, you know, when it tells us the why, we're focused on mechanisms, right? Mechanisms of how science and healing works, but not the existential why. You know, I believe that neurons and cells are sacred, that we're created in the image of the divine, whatever that image is, and that science and medicine, as all of my colleagues have said so far, work together beautifully. And I'm excited to explore that theme a little bit more today.
Thank you.
Thank you to the panelists who answered. I guess moving on to our next question. Sorry, can everyone hear? Moving on to the next question is, have you had crisis of faith and doubt? And I guess just elaborating on that and whether or not science had something to do with it.
And not everyone need to respond to this because, you know, if you're like me, you've never doubted anything ever in your entire life. So, who would like to address that? Oh, Jesse, you're it.
Yeah, I know I just spoke, but I'm happy to. The answer simply for me is yes, every single day. I wake up and I'm not sure exactly what I believe, how it's different from the day before and how it'll be different later that afternoon. You know, my concept of the world, of the divine, is constantly shifting and changing and being so close to science. And having a major in psychology in college, existential psychology, the psychology of death. You know, being so close to that and talking about what happens when we're, you know, in the ground is scary, and also has made me wonder, you know, whether there's anything and whether we create religion to, you know, feel better about things. You know, that's, you know, maybe it's taboo that I'm saying that, but I think it's a question that comes to a lot of people's minds, and it's one we have to grapple with and deal with. You know, and ultimately, every time I ask that, you know, I'm reminded of the nuance of my own brain and how I can even come to questions. The fact that I can come to questions like this is somewhat of a miracle that we have this consciousness. And, you know, for me, I'm never going to have quality answers, but the more questions I have, the better I feel. Just like science, religion often give me questions, and doubt doesn't deter me. It's actually part of my religious tradition, part of Judaism, to wrestle. You know, the Jews are called the people of Israel. I'm not talking about, you know, the political state of Israel. I'm talking about the people of Israel, the descendants of Jacob, who was renamed Israel in the Bible. And the word Israel, when Jacob got that name, he was given that name because he wrestled with a divine, with an angel, with God, whatever. And Israel means one who wrestled with God. And as a Jew, as part of the people Israel, I find it my duty actually to wrestle regularly on a daily basis with God, with my own conception of the divine, and to continue that wrestle probably for the rest of my life.
Thank you.
Asher's announcements. Oh, Asher's announcements. Go ahead, Asher.
Oh, sorry, I thought someone else was speaking, but yeah, similar sentiments. I think as you asked that question, I thought of there's a scripture in the Bible somewhere in Mark, I think it's Mark 9:24 actually. There's a man who basically runs up to Jesus, and Jesus says, if you believe, anything is possible. And he says, I believe, but help my unbelief, which means that you can have unbelief with your belief, right? If you think of your heart as soil, right, you can have multiple types of seed in there. You can have doubt, you can still have faith. And so I think in a world where knowledge is increasing, right, I believe that God still welcomes those questions. And I feel like the more questions we even have actually points to how big God is and how much we as like humans do not know. But I've always found comfort in the fact that God is fully aware of my unbelief or my doubts and is asking me to come with those things, right, as I am. There's another scripture I'm reminded of where he talks about his children crying out, right? People seeking God and wanting him. But at the end of the day, when he comes back and when he comes to visit us, right, would we still have faith? And so it points to the fact that God is fully aware of the fact that there might be times where you have doubt or unbelief, right? And so in those moments where, you know, I may have more questions than answers, I'm comforted in the fact that the God I serve, the Jesus I believe in, is fully aware of my struggles. And so kind of just pacing myself to, you know, not necessarily jump to any conclusions, but rest in that understanding that God knows, he hears, and he's with me. So that's kind of how I've dealt with that battle between faith, not faith, science, and yeah.
So, before I was a priest, I was a lawyer, and I'm going to parse out this question. I'm not going to say words. Crisis of faith, yes. Doubt as unbelief, no. Doubt as not fully understanding, all the time. Doubt as not being able to explain, absolutely, also all the time. And I don't think science had anything to do with any of those. So for me, I think about it as if questioning, trying to question. What I do when I think of things through religion or faith is trying to answer the big questions and trying to find both little t truth and big T truth. Sort of what is knowledge? What is the head information that helps me understand the world and how I'm experiencing it? And what's the heart information? Science, other academic topics help me come up with sort of data thinking information. My faith answers a lot of my soul questions. So for me, crisis of faith is when I can't necessarily access my soul, or when I feel like my spiritual practices aren't working. Doubt is unbelief. I've never doubted that there is a God, if that's the question. I've always sort of known that, but there have been times when I felt like I couldn't access God or hear God, that I was blocked in some way. And for me, that is the crisis of faith. So it has nothing to do with science, so much it has to do with where I am, how grounded I am, how much I can open myself up to God, up to love in the world. In terms of doubt as unknowing or not being able to explain, yes, because the questions we're talking about are massive. And they're massive even, I mean, what a lot of the science folks I meet here study, they study things I don't even know what the words mean. And there's so much knowledge that you all have that I'm not even going to use the words because they're not right, but there's also so much more knowledge that you can be reaching for and attaining and understanding how it all comes together. And that is true for me, I think, on a spiritual level also, right? What are the questions that bring meaning in our lives? Why are we here? Why do we love one another? What is the role of compassion in the world? Is there a God, and how does God work in the world? What happens after death? Those questions, again, every time we get a little more knowledge, there's still more. We never quite fully attain it. And so in that sense, the doubt of not being able to explain the answers to these big questions is there, and I think it's really holy. One of the great gifts from the tradition that I find myself in the sort of span of Christianity, is the belief that questions are holy. That questioning is holy, that curiosity is holy. Because what we're doing when we question things is we are saying we want to learn more about this world and about who God is, depending on what the questions are. And so that is holy, holy, sacred work. And doubt, in that meaning of doubt, is to be embraced, regardless of sort of what field it is in.
So the way that I interpret crisis of faith is a very serious event in your life where you decide that I'm going this direction or that direction, or whatever direction. And where Islam understands that your faith will go up and down, and you will always want your trajectory to be heading upwards, right? So year 1 you're here, year 10 you're here, but you've gone sort of like this to get there. You haven't gone like this. And so the idea of what a lot of my colleagues are talking about is you're using the signs around you, you're using the moments around you to sort of increase your faith as you go. But I think every one of us, well, I shouldn't probably say that. I know I've gone through a crisis of faith, right? Where I said that I converted to Islam, even though I was born into a Muslim family, and that sort of you making a hard decision that this is the way I want to go forward. But beyond that, once you've made that decision, one would hope, and again, there are incidences where people will turn around and say that this was the wrong decision, I should go in a different way. Hopefully that doesn't happen to any of you, and it does happen to people. But the idea of you want to be interacting with people, keeping company with people, maybe reaching out to the spiritual advisors to try and keep your faith strong, right? If you feel that your faith is weak, and things happen, right? You have exams, you get busy, you have papers to do, whatever else, and you haven't had time for God. That happens, right? And so coming and actually interacting with people, coming to religious activities and events can help to boost that back up. So the way I'm looking at it is that your faith is up and down. It will always, it will waver from time to time, day to day, moment to moment. The challenge is to try and keep it growing, so that you're moving upwards in the stepstone. And the way I think about it is, it's as if you're on skis, right? And you're on the mountain trying to go up the mountain. If you are pushing against that mountain, you'll move up. It may be slow, but you'll move up. The moment you stop pushing, you're sliding back down. And so that push is constantly there. Less of a crisis of faith. I usually call it sort of you can consider it weakness of faith. But one thing that I like to say to a lot of my students is, if God was known as a fact, it wouldn't be faith anymore. The floor that you are sitting in, you don't have faith in that floor. Right? You know that floor is there, otherwise you'll be downstairs. So the fact that you don't know that God is there, hard facts, even though your faith may say yes, hard facts, right? That's faith. So keeping that faith strong is the work that you are doing on a constant basis to sort of keep yourself there.
Thank you, friends, colleagues. I realize that many people in the room come from maybe multiple religious belonging, may have been raised with a couple different traditions, different parents. Some people may have been raised with no tradition at all, or maybe religious nuns or spiritual, that's N-O-N-E-S, not N-U-N-S, religious nuns, like not a particular affiliation, or maybe spiritual but not religious, seeking. So it's really wonderful to have you here with your questions. We may have one question that has been posed to us. I want to see whether anyone else has written anything down or would have questions that you would share with us. We do have some other questions that I prepared in advance, but those may not be as interesting as what you have. Do you want to maybe pose the question that the students have raised, and then we can return to ours if need be?
Beautiful idea. The first question that was posed by a student is, are there any scientific breakthroughs led by people inspired by their faith in your faith tradition? Yeah, that's cool. Very cool question.
So if you can tell those, we don't have time for every person to answer every question, so just, maybe.
And being mindful of time, let's just answer the questions that we feel very strongly towards answering, and if not, allow there to be space for others to speak.
I can start with that. So one of the things that's interesting about Islam, that Islam actually advocated for a lot of scientific research. There's verses in the Quran that ask about pondering, that ask about, are you investigating, are you looking? In fact, there's one set of verses that asks us to look at the heavens, and then look at it again, and then look at it again, right? As if doing research on the heavens. And the Muslims actually took that and used it to actually advance scientific, sort of a lot of the math and sciences that we actually use today. Have you heard the word algebra before? Right? Al-Jabr is actually the person that invented algebra. You can hate him all you want to.
Not as much as the geometry guy.
But why did algebra get created, right? One of the reasons why algebra actually came about is the verses that talk about inheritance in the Quran are very algebraic. And you actually need algebraic functions to figure out who gets what once the parents, or the person dies. And so that's one of the reasons why actually it sort of pushed that math forward, so that we had an answer to how do you take inheritance.
And I would say yes, and they're actually, I'm talking in a very broad sense, but there are, if you go back, there's a line of sort of academic life in the Western world that was a combination of many different fields, where science and theology and literature and mathematics were all embraced as sort of one. And some of the people I'm thinking off the top of my head are some early, as I think about the Jesuits, for example, who are a Roman Catholic order of men for whom intellectual life is very, very important. So one of their primary callings is to have universities and places of learning, and each of them is very learned in a whole bunch of different fields. So, yes, I think within the Christian tradition, there are certainly places where folks of deep faith have been very active in the scientific field.
Okay, Jesse, you're up next, but we're going to pose a different question to you. So are you ready? This one,
Oh, yeah.
this one is, yeah. You're going to love it.
Also from a fellow student, what book or thinker or text was most influential to you in your spiritual journey?
Ooh.
Okay.
It's hard to answer.
No time to think about it, right? So, one Jewish thinker that I've been inspired by lately, I'm still on my Jewish journey. I'll always be on my Jewish journey, but particularly right now, I'm studying to be a rabbi. And, someone that's influential to many is Ruth Bader Ginsburg, former Supreme Court Justice who died a little over a year ago. Her book was called Justice, Justice You Shall Pursue. That is a quote from the Bible, from the Torah. It's written, Tzedek, Tzedek, Tirdoff. And to me, the core message that, I am divinely commanded to pursue justice is powerful. For me, certain rules and traditions are not actually in the Bible. Wearing a yarmulke, rabbis, they're not mentioned in the Torah. But justice is. This is, a core tradition. And, even in the last question, you were talking about, influential scientific and academic advancements inspired by religion. I happen to know Justice Ginsburg found her Judaism, based off her books and writings, found her Judaism to be a major source of her inspiration for the justice she pursued on behalf of our country. And I'm inspired regularly by that. And part of my tradition is to pray, to go to the synagogue to pray, sometimes several times a day. But for me, that's only half of it. The physical words of prayer, the motions that go along with it, that's only half of it. The other part of it is praying with my feet. Praying and putting the words that I pray into action through social justice, through reaching out to others, through community building, and repairing the world. Tikkun olam, we have a phrase for repairing the world. And to me, I think Justice Ginsburg embodies just that.
Terrific. Thank you. We have about 10 minutes, and I know our friend and colleague Jeff Sullivan from GEO has an announcement and a word to share with you at the end about some amazing opportunities. And then we've saved the food for last. You can mix and mingle and dine, or ditch with your food, whatever. That's lovely music. Who's got that ringtone? Oh, okay. Do either one of you want to mention a favorite book or thinker, or proceed to the next question? Not with
I'll
elaborating.
mention the title of the book, but that's as far as I'll go. I think the title says a lot. So the book is actually a book written by a Muslim scholar. It's actually called "I Want to Repent, But," and I'll leave it at that. And that was actually it was a nice book, nice short read, but it was really pushing, motivating.
I have a whole wall of books. But I would say in terms of thinkers, St. Ignatius of Loyola, who is the basis for Jesuit theology, who does a lot about examining your own life. And then this amazing medieval woman named Hildegard of Bingen, who was a woman of deep faith. She was a mystic who had mystical spiritual encounters. She was also a healer. Some of her texts about the healing properties of plants are still considered sort of be very spot on, and she also founded an amazing community of women in Germany, religious women, that is still active and running, and they are some of the toughest, feistiest, strongest women I've ever met. So,
Could you repeat your name?
Hildegard of Bingen. She was also a composer. She was amazing.
Anonymous for the CD of their singing of Hildegard of Bingen is extraordinary. And that set us up perfectly for next week's Interfaith Dinner Dialogue on mysticism.
Please come.
Don't know what we're talking about? Come next week and think about it with us. So, next question is from Sophie.
Wonderful. The next question is, how do you see religion and science intersect in the face of death and in the process of grief?
Oh, wow. I just want to say, whoever asked that, like, we are with you in, like, each of us is bearing so much loss, so much grief. I'll actually just speak for my colleagues and myself and millions of others around the planet. I won't speak for you, but there's so much grief, so much suffering in this world. And our staff is here for you all the time. Calm, non-judgmental, listeners, support people. Yeah. We're holding you in the light with all our losses and all our griefs. So, who'd like to speak to that? Megan.
So I think religion and science, faith and knowledge, like sort of brain knowledge and heart knowledge, are integral in all aspects of our understanding of what happens in life and in the cycle of life. And if we think about sort of who each of us is as an entity, we have a body, we have a spirit, we have a soul. And I feel like in times of great illness, in the death process, in the grieving after a death, and the grieving that precedes a death, all that knowledge, all that understanding, each have a role in different ways. So this spring, I watched someone very dear to me die. And one of the things that was very interesting in the months leading up to her death was watching the different role that different practitioners had in her experience. Her body was failing her. She had an incurable condition. And there were doctors, and there were home health aides, and there were hospice nurses who did what they could to keep her as present with us as long as they could, to keep her in as little pain as she could be in, to figure out new ways for her to walk when the walking dissipated. And there were priests who came in, who blessed her, who brought her communion, who anointed her, who talked to her about her fears and her sorrows, at the questions she had about whether she'd be reunited with her husband, about what came after. And in all of that, I was amazed at this incredible group of gifted people, each of whom brought something different to a different piece of her that was in need as she was dying and approaching death. And so what I would say is that both religion and science and all of the compassion and emotional pieces that each of us have play a role in all of that. And since her death, I think about the people I've talked to about my own grief, and they are therapist, spiritual director, priest friends, a family, a psychiatrist friend. I have needed information from all those fields to help me understand how to live a life without this incredibly important presence in my life. So I think they're all incredibly important and each play a role, just as our being approaches death in a myriad of ways, so too each of them can offer a form of healing and comfort in that time. Jesse?
Yeah, thanks. I'll be brief because I know we're short. And thank you to my colleague who just shared a powerful story. I don't think I mentioned in my introduction that my most recent role was a hospital chaplain this past summer at a trauma center. And specifically, I was a chaplain, an interfaith chaplain for patients of all faiths in the cardiothoracic ICU. And I worked closely with the doctors and nurses and technicians who were on the floor. And I walked a lot of patients and them through their journey towards death and thinking about these topics. And it was a difficult experience for everybody involved, but deeply meaningful. One particular woman who was in the ICU for about 50-something days, with contact precautions. Her husband visited her every single day. They were older, but not so old, and he had to wear gowns and masks and goggles every time he would walk into her room. And his identical twin brother was there a lot too, to support his brother and his sister-in-law. And this brother that was there was a Catholic priest. And I was the chaplain assigned to them. And the guy whose wife was dying, this brother was already a religious figure, but he kind of explained to me he wanted someone outside the family to talk to, and I was a chaplain assigned to him. And he and his brother together at the end of this journey wrote me the most beautiful letter, and I keep that on my desk. His wife did end up passing away, and it was a hard experience for me as a chaplain after having gotten to know them so well. But the interfaith connections we built, the connections I had with their doctors and nurses, everyone who cared so much about this woman that was in a hospital for so long, was deeply powerful to me. Doctors and nurses pour so much effort and time and sweat into their work, and so dedicated to the science of medicine, but it physically exhausts their care, emotionally exhausts them, and at the end of the day, science only has so much authority in a hospital system, but when we need care for our minds and our spirits outside of the care we receive for our bodies, then it comes time for religion or faith or spirituality to come in and to provide the primary support. At the end of the day, we have knowledge, but we're also human, and we need to address that part of ourselves. And it really was the perfect summer for me, and that it set me up for what I needed when at the end of the summer, when I had 2 weeks left of my chaplaincy time at the hospital, my internship, my own grandfather passed away, and I'm very close with my family. And I was in the hospice with him for 3 days. I slept in his room as he was dying, and I learned quite a lot from that experience. And probably after having been a hospital chaplain, having started a rabbinical journey, it was exceptionally different than it would have been for me otherwise. And mission lends up a lot. I know he died. I know how he died. He had cancer for the 4th time. I understand as much of the science and mechanisms as I can. But at the end of the day, my religion gives me a community to grieve with, to connect with. It gives me people to speak to. It gives me a framework to remember him year after year by, with a special religious marker on the anniversary of his death. And it gives me so much more that I might not get without with only focusing on the scientific part of the healing process. As it was stated earlier, each part of the process acknowledges a different part of us, of our humanity, of what we do.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, and may your grandfather's memory be for a blessing.
Thank you so much.
And may that be true for each of us who've lost loved ones this year and are walking through the valley and we hope that you'll walk with us. We have an opportunity on Friday to continue a conversation like this every Friday from 2 to 2:45 across the hall. In our dialogue room, we have something called Circle of Life. So an opportunity to come together to share with new friends and old about the meaningful questions in life. And each of our spiritual, religious, humanist student groups addresses some of these questions. And we have a wonderful cast of characters in our spiritual advisors and affiliates available for one-on-one spiritual advising. And you can contact me, a.kern@northeastern.edu, or come by the office and make an appointment, and I can refer you or meet with you myself or connect you with one of these fine folks. We realize we have not answered all of these questions, but we will linger and eat with you, and you can approach and ask your questions. And we can invite the ever awesome Jeff Sullivan from GEO to transition us from this time of rich sharing into a world of opportunity that awaits you. Can we give it up for each of you for coming out this evening and wrestling with these deep questions with us, and to each of my colleagues for their wise words and presence here. Let's give it up, y'all. Jeff Sullivan.
Okay. Hey everybody, I'm Jeff Sullivan. I am the Assistant Director of Advising in the Global Experience Office, and I'm doing a tabling event tonight. We also provided the food as well. We always love collaborating with CSDS and making sure when students go abroad that they are well supported as far as faith and spirituality. We do a number of different types of ways to support students when they're abroad. And so we just wanted you to make you aware of those opportunities, as a lot of you, I believe, are honor students, right? Yeah, so going on dialogues this summer, and so we always want students to make sure wherever they're going that they have the support of, whatever faith and spirituality needs that you might have in another country, and what does that look like abroad. And we are doing the dinner dialogue December 1st, which I believe is the last one of the semester, which will be dedicated to students that will be going abroad in the spring, but as well as subsequent years. So so I'm here. I'll be tabling out front, but I just want everyone just to be aware and come up and say hi. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer any questions about different programs, dialogues, global co-op, semester study abroad, whatever you're thinking, and the ways in which we work with CSDS. So thank you for coming, and have a great evening.
And thank you, Jeff. And Sagar and Francisco and Akshat have arranged for our meeting.